Okay, Chapter 3 review. What we're going to review in Chapter 3 is how to solve an equation. And how you solve an equation for a variable is you would do the inverse operation. So if you have addition, you use subtraction to solve. If you have subtraction, you use addition to solve. If you have multiplication, you use division. If you have division, you use multiplication. All right? So if I were to have a problem like x plus 2 equals 10, I would use the inverse of what's happening. So it's being added. So I subtract 2, which cancels it out here. And I subtract 2 on this side, and I get x equals 8. Same thing with multiplication and division. If I were to have 2 times x equals 10, I would use the inverse of what's going on. So what's going on is multiplication. So I divide on both sides, and I get x equals 5. So in example number 1, what we want to do is solve for the variable. So I ask myself, what's happening between the variable and the number? Subtraction. So in order to get this variable by itself, I do the inverse, which is addition. Which what happens here is that cancels out, and I add 9 to the other side. So whatever you do to one side of the equation, you always want to do to the other. And I do negative 17 plus 9, which is negative 8. Okay? Next problem. I look right here and I say, all right, I have to ask myself, what is 10? Is it positive or negative? I know it's positive, so the inverse of that is negative or subtraction. So that cancels out. It cancels out over here, and I get A equals 15. So in the next example, we are going to do solving these equations, but we've got multiplication this time. So I look and I ask myself, okay, what's going on between the negative 4 and the x? Multiplication, because anytime I see a number and a variable written side by side with no sign in between them, I automatically know it's multiplication. So the inverse of multiplication is division. And you always want to divide exactly by what is being multiplied, which is negative 4, which cancels this out here. Whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So I get x equals, well, there is no 1 divided by negative 4, so I just leave it as a fraction. 1, I could either write it as 1 over negative 4. I could put the negative sign out in the middle, or I could put it at the top, as long as there is just one negative sign in this problem. Okay? So the next one, I ask myself, what's going on between 30 and b? Multiplication. So the opposite of multiplication is division. So I divide both sides by 30. And I get b is equal to, I need to reduce this fraction because what I get is 5 over 30. And I know that 5 can go into both of these. So I divide both the top and the bottom by 5. And I get b is equal to 1 over 6. Okay, so the next example we're going to do is whenever we have division. So I need to ask myself, what's going on between the x and the 5? Division. So I need to do the inverse of division, which is multiplication. So I'm going to multiply this side by 5, which cancels that out. And I also multiply this side by 5. And I get x equals, I count up the number of negative signs I have. Remember that from yesterday, which is 1. So I know my answer is going to be negative. And then 30 times 5 is 150. All right, next problem. I ask myself, what's going on between the x and the 9? Anybody know? Division. So the inverse of that is multiplication. So I multiply by 9 to cancel out, multiply by 9 to cancel out, and I get x equals what? Who can tell me what 25 times 9 is? Anybody know? I know it's going to be a negative. All right, let's do it out the long way. 25 times 9. 9 times 5 is 45. 9 times 2 is 18 plus 4 is 22. So 225 is my answer. Okay? Okay, in this next example, we're going to deal with whenever I have a fraction in front of the variable. Now, remember yesterday when we went over KFC, keep, flip, change. I can never divide by a fraction. Remember that? So in order to get n by itself, technically, I would need to divide by a fraction. But because I can't do that, instead, I'm just going to multiply by the reciprocal, which what that does is, let's say this is our problem here. When I multiply by the reciprocal, all I've got to do is flip the fraction. So I'd have negative 3 over 2. That totally cancels each other out. So whatever I do to one side, I've got to do to the other. So I need to multiply this by negative 3 over 2. So all you got to do there is multiply by the reciprocal. And I'm going to write 10 over 1 so I see it as a fraction. Then I can cancel out. 2 can go into 2 one time. 2 can go into 10 5 times. And then I just multiply. Negative 3 times 5 is negative 15. 1 times 1 is 1, which I don't even have to write that. I get negative 15 equals m. All right, so let's do another one of these. All right, in order to get x by itself, what do I need to do? Exactly, flip 2 over 5. So I'm going to multiply by 5 over 2. What happens there is it totally cancels out. Whatever I do to one side, I've got to do to the other. So I multiply by 5 over 2. And I'm going to change this 5 to a fraction. Then is there anything I can cancel out? Nope. So I just multiply straight across. 5 times 5 is 25. 2 times 1 is 2. So I get 25 over 2 equals x. I could simplify that to make it a mixed number and get 12 1/2 if I wanted to. Or you could leave it just like it is. It doesn't matter to me. Either one would be fine. Okay? Okay, example 5. They want me to solve the equation. Now this time, I've got multi-steps to do. I've got to combine like terms, and then I can solve for x. So let's look for like terms, okay? Let's look in this problem. 7x plus 19 equals negative 2x plus 55. Remember, like terms have to have the same variable, and that variable has to be raised to the same power. So who can tell me which terms are like terms? 19 and 55 are like terms. And what's the other ones, Tommy? Negative 2 and 7 are like terms. But let's stop and look, because there is an equal sign separating them. So in order to move this 2x over here, I've got to do inverse. And in order to move the 19 over here, I've got to do inverse. So I asked myself, the inverse of negative 2x is what? Positive 2x. So I put plus 2x, which cancels it out, and I add 2x over here, which gives me 9x. All right? The inverse of positive 19 is what? Negative 19. So I write negative 19, which cancels it out here, and I write minus 19 over here. So what's 55 minus 19? 36. Yes, okay. So now I have 9x equals 36. What can I do to solve for x? Divide by 9, exactly. And what does x equal? 4, perfect. Okay, let's do another one of those. Let's do... All right, I want you to work on this one. 5x plus 20 equals 4x minus 10. So the first thing you have to do is combine like terms. And if those like terms are not on the same side as the equal, I've got to do inverse to get them to be together. Okay? Okay, Devin, tell me, what are my like terms here?
5x and 4x and 20 and -10.
Perfect. Okay? So I need to get them on the same side. So, Danielle, what did you do first?
Subtract 4x.
Perfect. Subtract 4x, which cancels out. And I subtract 4x here. 5 minus 4 is 1. Okay? Then, Tommy, what did you do next? You subtracted 20. Perfect. Then I have negative 10 plus negative 20 is what, Dominic? Negative 30. Then what would I do to get x by itself? You can just take off the 1. You can divide by 1, but anything divided by 1 is itself. So we just say x equals negative 30. Okay? All right, now let's do this last one on that page. Round to the nearest hundred. So they want me, once I actually do all this, they want me to round to the nearest hundreds. All right? So, first of all, before I can do anything, I need to add like terms. So let's locate our like terms. Danielle, what are two of my like terms? Perfect. Here's a like term. Here's a like term. Dominic, what are my other two like terms? Very good. Negative 6.13 and 5.96. So I need to combine these. So Tommy, what should I do first? Exactly. Make it a positive and move it over. So I put plus 7.28x. Add 9.92 plus 7.28. And I get 17.2x. All right. Then what would I do, Devin? Perfect. Add 6.13 to both sides, and I do 5.96 plus 6.13, and I get 12.09. Now what would I do? Divide 17.2 on both sides, and I get x equals I get 0.7029006, and it just keeps going. But in the instructions, it says round to the nearest hundredth. Okay? So I locate. What is the number in my hundredths position? 0. And what you do is you look to the number after it. If that number is 5 or bigger, you round the 0 up. If it's 4 or less, the 0 stays the same. So the number behind it is 2. So the 0 stays the same, and my answer is x equals 0.70. Okay? All right, so last type of problems that we're going to do today are percentage problems. Okay? Percentage problems are really easy if you break them down into two fractions. Percentage problems can always be broken down into two fractions. First of all, if I were to tell you, I am 75% sure it's going to rain today. What am I 75 out of what percent? 100%. So anytime I have a percentage, I always know it can be written over 100. So what I have is one of my fractions is always the percentage over 100. Okay? So I need to do percentage, percentage over 100 equals, the next fraction is always is over of. okay? Percentage over 100 equals is over of. So this is all I'm going to do then, is I just look at my problem and I try to fill in a number for each of these pieces of the fraction. Now, you're always going to get 3 out of the 4. One of them is going to be an x, something you don't know. Okay, so let's look at this. What number is 25%? What should 25% be written over? What's the percentage always written over? 100. So I write 25 over 100. Then is over of. So I look for the word is and look for the number right in front of it. Do I have a number for is? No, so I write x. Then what is the number for of? 80. Now all I got to do is cross multiply and solve. So I do 100 times x, which is 100x, equals 25 times 80, which is 2,000. And then I can just solve to find the number. So I divide by 100, and I get x equals 20. So 20 is 25% of 80. Okay? So is over of equals percent over 100. Or percent over 100 equals is over of. So let's look at this next problem. What percent? What do I not know? The percent. So I can write x over 100 equals is over of. What number goes with is? 29, because it says is 29. And what number goes with of? 40. Then I just cross multiply. X times 40 is 40x. 29 times 100 is 2,900. And I just solve for x. So I divide by 40. And I get x equals 72.5. And what were they looking for in the beginning? The percent. So I know it has to be 72.5%. Okay? All right, this last one. 80%. So what do I know? What already fraction do I know? 80 over 100 equals, what do I know? I know of, so I know that goes on the bottom, and I know x is the number I'm missing. So is over of. And then you just cross multiply. So I'm going to have 100x equals 49 times 80, which is 3,920. Then I just divide by 100. And I get x equals 39.2. Okay? Does anybody have any questions over these?